All right. Good stuff with Spock and McCoy. And let's bring in that man who combines all of it, the logic, the energy, the enthusiasm. He is, of course, Eric Peters. Greetings, Eric. How are you? How are the cats, my friend?
They're all good. Greetings, my friend. And I'm glad you brought up Spock in this context that we're talking about with regard to Trump and the war. You remember the episode, of course you do, where the landing party gets transported to the alternate universe where the Federation is evil and there's the evil Spock.
Yes.
And even in that context, the evil Spock would have used reason and logic and understood that it's probably not ultimately to the benefit of the Federation to obliterate, what were they, the Halkans, I think, on that planet. You know, it's a shame that Trump, unfortunately, isn't much of a Star Trek fan.
No, and he really is showing signs of. I know he's way past the mating age, but remember when the Vulcans would go through Ponfar and they'd start freaking out? And Trump was never the logical one like Spock in the first place, but he's like the egomaniacal Kirk from the Mirror universe. And that scene where we have one scene where Spock is approaching McCoy. It is the alternate Spock in one of those scenes. So there you go. And Trump you have a great article over at your website, Eric. So let's rock it right in there and show it to everybody. I'm going to bring up, there's Spock. See, that's the alternate Spock right there. See the insignia? He's got his Vulcan, the Spock's beard thing. So that's the one. That's exactly what you're talking about. So let's bring it up right now and bring that onto our stage. Okay. Orange turns red. It's perfect.
Have some fun with it, right?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Can I go through this little comic thing?
Yeah.
Okay, this is great. So you have the 4 stages of being confronted with your own lies. 1, the lean. Nailed it. And the head becomes heavier than the body. 2, color change. And he did get very, very livid. The complexion shifts from orange to pink. 3, insults. The interviewer is declared stupid. Yes. And of course, corrupt. And then the awkward storm off. The subject leaves visibly upset and darts off to do a true social post explaining how unfair everything was. And you've got a great piece. Shall we show this to the audience in case they missed this, Eric?
Please do.
All right, let's get to it. I've got the clip over here in my stack of stuff. So let me present it. I had to actually ramp it up a little bit and amplify it. So let me get this going here. All right, and all right, this is looking good. Now, again, I'm no fan of NBC, obviously, but Kristen Welker was asking, I thought, a pretty valid question. Don't you think, Eric?
Oh yeah, and that to me, the most striking take-home point about all of this is that Trump's usual formula has worn off. I think he got a lot of mileage out of talking about the fake news, meaning the way the media, generally speaking, is biased toward the left, which is absolutely true. And by and large, a lot of people were frustrated by that. Certainly, people who supported Trump. So they were empowered when Trump would call out the fake news media. But in this case, she was simply pointing out that the man has repeatedly, serially said that no more wars. I won't be starting any wars. I mean, she literally just pointed out what he said, his own words. And he erupted in a petulant fury and lied. He just outright lied. He didn't even equivocate and say, well, I meant something else. Or, he just outright said that he didn't say that when in fact, there it is. You can see it in living color.
I wonder how many, my mind was walking the same landscape because, having done all that work at MRC TV, there was a time period when we were we were showing where Donald Trump was being misquoted or they were taking it out of context, good people on both sides with the whole thing down, what was that, in South Carolina, Georgia?
He was in Virginia, it was in Charlottesville.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, right. And, someone was killed at that, but they inflamed that. And as you say, it has absolutely run out of mileage for him because now he's on the other side of it. Not only is he on the other side of it, he literally has supporters in the Congress calling the presidents of universities up to berate them for not silencing speech on campuses sufficiently for what they want. It's
Absolutely.
just stunning.
Yeah.
So, okay, here we go, brother. All right, I'm going to bring your volume down just in case. I think they have fixed that over at StreamYard. But here we go. This is the wonders of Donald Trump with Kristen Welker. And yes, he does crunch that mic pretty loudly at the end. Hold on a second. Yeah, I got to go back. All right, here we go. The election was rigged, he says.
The election was rigged. It was a dirty election.
Mr.
And it's
President,
happening again right now in California.
Presented evidence
it's happening
that the
right now in California. Right now, it's look at what's happening in California.
To that?
It's
the
4
Republicans
days.
Are doing well in
California. It's no, they're not. They're dropping fast because it's a rigged election. Let me tell you, it's 4 days. And they aren't even close to coming up with it.
That's how they count.
You know why they're doing that? Because they're cheating on the election.
Do you have evidence to support
all
that?
I have to do is look. All I have to do is look.
That's not evidence.
And I listen. And I listen to people. And let's see what happens.
But, sir, that's not evidence.
Do you think it's appropriate?
That's how they count the votes in
Do you
California.
think it's appropriate that they have an election and 5 days later they're nowhere close to picking a winner?
State and local officials acknowledge they are slow. They're urging.
No, they're crooked.
They're urging the votes to be counted quickly. That's how they vote in California.
They're crooked, just like you're crooked. Your press is crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked.
Now, I got to ask you, before we go any further, Eric, right there, that could be grounds for defamation suit right there. Don't you think?
Well, I suppose so. But, another facet of this that strikes me is that this shtick about election fraud has gotten to be really tiresome.
Yeah.
As if it had any relevance at all to the things that are really important right now, like the burgeoning apocalypse in the Middle East and over in Kyiv in Ukraine. These are the things that Americans are interested in. They're really, beyond the point of the 2020 election or whatever's going on in California. And, more profoundly, I had a piece the other day, which we can get into if you'd like, that just talks about it doesn't matter. These elections they're theater designed to legitimize this fundamentally corrupt thing that they like to call our democracy.
Yeah. And, Eric, I'll bring something up because I was curious. Again, at 6 this morning, I turned on WRKO out of Boston, and this host, Jeff Cooner, it's almost as if you can predict exactly the recipe he's going to be putting together for people's breakfasts. It's the same order going through the drive-through every morning. Now I know, I would be talking about the breach of the ceasefire, Israel attacking Lebanon, all those types of things. Maybe the Kushner Island thing as part of the mix of a show, that sort of thing. No, all for every hour of his 3 hours was about NBC News and Kristen Welker. That's all it was. And it hits exactly what you're discussing. It's the false dialectic. It's the false choice of the Hegelian dialectic of it's about winning the election. It's about elections. It's about the party. And that's where they're focused. It doesn't have anything really to do with policies or principles or anything, because those are subsumed to the greater desire for them to get their person in there. And perhaps you've seen this sort of thing as a libertarian. How often have we seen libertarians who give up on principles in order to sort of try to get some advantage where they think, well, maybe this time we can get into an office and get something done? Have you seen that sort of thing in the past? Because this is what the Democrats and Republicans do all the time, I think.
Well, sure, of course, all the time. The examples are rife. I think, though, that the more relevant point in this context is, okay, so you vote for Trump because he promises not to launch wars. Specifically, that was like one of the key platforms of his whole resurgent political career, post 2020. I won't get us into wars. Wars are dumb. Middle Eastern wars, they're bad for America. Right. Okay, so, the hook was set. People bid it, got hooked. And what happened with our democracy? We voted for this guy, and what did we get? More war.
Exactly.
Exactly. So and he's trying to get people emotionally aroused about, well, they're dirty and they're cheating. They're going to take the election. It doesn't matter. They win, we lose every single time. How many times does Charlie Brown have to try to kick the football before he finally recognizes that Lucy is going to pull the football away every single time?
Exactly. All right. We'll continue with more. Here we go with Kirsten and Donald, getting redder and redder by the moment.
I'm not crooked, but let's
Really?
let's
Well, you
continue.
play right into their hands. And
Let's continue.
You're either crooked or you're stupid.
Let's
you play
continue.
right into their hands with this rap. You know that these elections are rigged. Your network knows that they're rigged. You know that I won an election in a landslide, and I got 94% bad press.
But Mr. President,
You know why I
you've
got
never
that?
presented
Because you have no
evidence.
credibility.
But you've never presented evidence that it was rigged. Let's keep talking about. I want to talk about Todd.
You
Blank.
have more evidence. There's more evidence than ever presented.
Let's talk
Your
about.
elections
You
in
went
this
to
country,
court.
we're like a third world country.
But, sir-
Your elections are crooked, and you're crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked,
Mr.
and so
President-
is ABC and CBS and CNN.
But, Mr. President-
You're one-sided crooked networks. Right, let's call it quits because I've had enough. Thank you, darling. Have a good time.
Mr. President, let's please. I traveled all the way to Wisconsin.
I've sat in the
traveled
rain with
all.
you.
I know. I
I've sat in the
traveled
rain
all the
with
way
you
to
for an hour,
Wisconsin.
on and off in the rain, and I've given you enough time. You ought to straighten out your press because you know what?
Mr.
A
President,
country can never be
we
great
traveled.
with a dishonest
Listen,
press.
we
Come on, let's
traveled all the way to Wisconsin for this interview.
Oh.
I spoke with President Trump on Saturday, and we both acknowledged the complications during the interview posed by the rain. He agreed to sit down with me for another Meet the Press interview.
All right, Eric. I just keep thinking of the cult. Here comes the rain. It was just a misunderstanding because all that rain coming down, you know, almost
Notice
like
he didn't mention anything about Fox News and his cavalcade of abuse about the fake news.
Yeah, that's for darn sure. Absolutely. And, you know, again, looking at it draws back memories of the abuse that was leveled through the media, the way they manipulated things. And the problem that I find, Eric, is that if people are going to be hanging on this thing, which is to me an absolute waste of time now, they need to be able to say, I support the president because I do have the evidence. I mean, you and I saw that weird F thing at 2 a.m, but you can't prove anything. So what are you going to do? And so one of the things that I find is so many people will attach themselves to a certain position, and they themselves are undercutting their own reliability by not saying, I demand the evidence from these people themselves. They just say, I believe him. And that unfortunately is a black mark against themselves. It shows that they aren't working hard enough to make themselves believable. And so nobody's going to be listening to them either.
Oh, absolutely. I think the cynicism has gotten to the point of pervasiveness with good reason. You know, it's not so much that the elections are corrupt, it's that the system is corrupt.
Yes.
Profoundly, unfixably corrupt. You know, for example, why couldn't we simply have a none of the above option on every ballot? All the way from the local to the presidential, none of the above. So the people who don't want to have anything to do with either the Democrats or the Republicans could express that choice. Why is it that you never have the opportunity to express that choice? Because they want you pigeonholed in one or the other. They want you fighting left, right, Republican, Democrat, back and forth, nattering at each other, not noticing that ultimately it's the same team, irrespective of whatever color T-shirt they happen to be wearing at a given moment.
Eric, let me bring this up to you as well, and then I want to ask you a couple questions about your a couple of your articles. But I would get abused by some of my left-wing friends when I would discuss the fact that Bernie Sanders is an absolute hypocrite when it comes to supposedly being against war. And I brought it up here many times. He lobbied to get Lockheed Martin to open up a manufacturing plant in Vermont to employ people in Vermont making nuclear weapons. They make nukes. And you just sit there and you say, listen, how can you claim that you are anti-war when you support Bernie Sanders based on an actual artifice? It's not real. And it's just like Donald Trump. He's supposedly a man of the people, and he's flying he's helping get Jonathan Pollard back to Israel. He's handing out weapons to the Israelis, and his son and his son-in-law and his daughter are purchasing an island that very clearly is mixed up with a lot of corruption, and we're going to go into some of that stuff.
He's a man of the rich people, And so is
Yeah.
Sanders, and so is pretty much every other politician by necessity. There's money in politics. Why is that? The reason why, in order to get elected, you have to get money from big donors. That's the only way you'll ever get elected to anything beyond the level of, say, the county supervisory board or whatever in your little small town hamlet. And even then, money is involved. Why?
Right.
Because it's an investment. The people who are putting money into the system are buying you. They want you to be their tool. It's all about grift and grab. That's what this is all about. I mean, if it were legitimately, that term we hear all the time, public service. If public service were a nonprofit enterprise, if it were simply, a position wherein ideas were brooded about and matters of protecting people's rights were decided, as opposed to handing out patronage, dispensing other people's property, taking money from people to give it to these people, then all of a sudden the money would be gone and there wouldn't be, any profit motive any longer, and everything would devolve back to the local level, as Jefferson hoped it would. And, I'm an adherent to that particular point of view. Government, if we have to have it, maybe at some level we have to have it, but the only level where it doesn't become thoroughly evil, I think, is at the extreme local level, like one notch above the family level.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've heard Albert J. Nock. And, Nock made an important distinction between government and the state.
Yes, exactly.
Government essentially is rules. And in a family, you have government. You have rules that people abide by within the context of the family. And in a community, there are rules also. And there's nothing inherently evil about rules. The state, on the other hand, is inherently evil. And once you get beyond that kind of almost informal social interaction of rules between people that are, largely non-coercive, but just rules, that are enforced by, if you don't go along with this, well, you get excluded from society. We're not going to do business with you. We're not going to deal with you because we know that you're not a trustworthy person. You're a malicious person. Once it gets beyond that and you start dealing with the state, it becomes this massive edifice, this remote thing that disempowers people. I mean, think about how impotent we feel. Washington, the imperial capital. I mean, it's no different today than it probably was during, the age of Tiberius. The idea that you're somehow going to have an influence on what Tiberius does, it's preposterous.
Ironically, James Kirk's middle name was Tiberius, of course. Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there is this fallacy, I think, Eric, of people who are statists thinking that, and I often bring it up, that because people can't handle themselves, there has to be some larger artifice that will handle it, which of course is tautological and it's inherently illogical. But the thing that gets me is, even if they think that through, if they were to say 51% or 80% of the people somehow in some plebiscite voted that this is the way it's going to go, that literally prevents 20% of the people to have the ability to say, no, thank you. So it is unto itself an immoral imposition. And of course, the higher the degree of the people who vote for it, the less the impetus is for someone to be able to argue that the state has to do it anyway. Right. So, the more popular it is, the less argument someone has that the state's got to do it. And the less popular it is, the greater the argument that it should not be forced on people. So the state negates itself in both logical directions.
Yeah, and it also has a compounding effect. The state interferes in one way, that begets problems. People get upset because of the problems. And what do they, in the main, want? More government. To fix the problem created by government, they go to the same institution that is causing the problem, making it worse, and expecting that this time, we'll have reform. This time, if we let the government have even more power and control us even more, we'll have a better result than we would have had if there had been no government control in the first place. I remember reading, there was a quote, I wish I could remember it verbatim, having to do with the debate that occurred in London before there was an official London police force. And opponents of it said, it would be preferable to have 12 people knifed to death in Whitehall annually than to grant the government this sort of power. And the point is apt. It's well taken. Yeah. There's this fallacy that you can somehow have utopia, that there are going to be no problems if we just cede all our power to the government, all authority to the all-knowing, omnipotent government. In other words, we're going to exchange these actual real problems that will absolutely happen. Like, for example, if there weren't speed limits, you'd maybe have a few reckless people on the road who drove faster than they ought to, and so on, and there would be a few accidents, and people would die. So the solution to that is to essentially criminalize everybody who drives faster than an arbitrary speed.
Right, right.
And punish them and erect this cynical, corrupt regime of serial constant mulcting. This idea that, a guy runs a red light, he's drunk, he kills a family. Terrible thing. Nobody likes that. But now we treat everybody as a presumptive drunk. And not only that, we now have to have these things built into our cars from come 2027 to show it if you ever distracted.
Oh, I know. Oh, it's incredible. You mentioned Albert J. Nock, one of my real heroes, and his book, Our Enemy, the State, was a big revelation for me when I was about 19 or 20. And, it sounds shocking at first because I didn't even know, what does he mean by state, like the state of New Hampshire? And then you start to realize he's talking statism, he's talking the polis. And it's interesting because this manifests itself in so many different ways. Over in your article, I wanted to highlight this particular paragraph of the article. So here's his article, and you've got embedded here, you've got the 10 years of Trump promising not to start new wars. Great stuff. Drop side, put that together. Then you have this. It is true, as Trump said, that NBC and the rest of the fake news apparat is corrupt, but that does not change the corruption of Trump. This is an extremely important point, Eric, and I wanted to compliment you on this and many others. He audaciously claimed he never promised no war, a lie so stupendous it could be used as an example of the big lie most everyone has heard about. The saying is attributed to Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda in National Socialist Germany. Nazi is a term the National Socialists never used themselves, but which is reflexively used by the American socialists and their brethren communists to sort of paper over the reality that the Nazis were, in fact, socialists, a kind of militarized socialism, but nonetheless socialists. When called out on this, his usually orange visage turned beet red. He eventually stormed out of the interview, dropping his microphone on the floor and audibly crushing it, perhaps inadvertently, with his enormous bulk. And I have to say, as you were writing that, did you get a sense that the terms enormous bulk and crushing it, like it was like a punctuation to the man's political career? That crushing the bug, that was it. What did you what were you thinking?
I was reading something a while back that I thought was interesting about the word inspiration, in the context of being a writer or somebody who puts together scripts, as you've done. And this idea that it kind of comes from somewhere, it's an outside thing. When I write, and I've talked to other people who do what I do, you just flow. It's not that you ponder heavily over each sentence and each word. It's almost a stream of consciousness. And the really kind of numinous thing is that it seems that maybe it's coming from somewhere else. It's kind of like a Jungian, maybe I'm plugging into something,
I wonder about that sometimes, Eric, I know we're up against the clock. So let me just do this one thing. And then maybe we'll invite you back for some cake or something like that. Celebrate some birthday stuff a little bit later. But I want to go back over to your website and ask you, you've got a number of new ones here. The right to repair one is really important. That has so many radio stations advertising it. Which one would you like to hit? Democracy is silly.
Let's hit the repair one because people are talking about that. I think Lou Rockwell picked it up the other day as well.
Yeah.
And essentially the gist of it is that, the car companies are now asserting effective control over people's vehicles by claiming that they own the code, the software that's operating the vehicle. And if you don't have access to this stuff through their proprietary systems, you can't diagnose and so can't service your vehicle. They kind of got you over a barrel. So there have been efforts afoot to try to enact these so-called right to repair laws, which would require them to provide access. Of course, it's kind of a non sequitur if you have to pay for it, an exorbitant fee. For example, I've got two friends who are professional mechanics, and they've both told me the same thing. They have to not only have these elaborate pieces of diagnostic equipment to service the various makes and models of vehicles, but in many cases, they have to pay an annual subscription for the latest information because it's updated continuously. The change is now happening so so rapidly. You know, even in the course of say 6 months, they'll make a change to something. It's kind of like the way they update your phone. You know, it's not static. So you have to have the very latest information to be able to actually service these vehicles. Well, you know, it's just a dollars and cents kind of a thing. You know, the cost of getting the diagnostic equipment and paying the subscription is here. And then how much am I going to make by servicing these cars? And generally speaking, they're not going to make enough to service the vehicle to make it worth as an economic proposition. These are independent shops, mind you, not dealer shops, to deal with it. So they just say, I can't service those cars anymore. They've told me that. Like there's certain makes and models of cars that they just don't have the ability to service, not for lack of technical skill, but for access to this information. So effectively, people who own those cars have to go to an authorized dealer, a place that has that equipment and so on that they need. And of course, they're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's both economically obnoxious, and to me, the most obnoxious aspect of it beyond anything else is that this creeping assertion of ownership over things that you buy. You know,
and it goes into in your article, you point out they've been doing this with farm equipment for ages.
Yeah, and it goes back to, when did Bill Gates start doing this? Like back in the 90s, I think. You remember when you used to buy a box with a CD in it, and you had the Office Suite or whatever it was, the software, and you owned it. You physically had this physical CD. Now you buy a license to use the software. And if you don't update your subscription, I think once a year or however often it is, then it doesn't work anymore. You certainly can't hand off the CD to your kid, even though it's the old software in the past. If you had a teenage kid in high school or whatever, here's the software, feel free to use it. You can't do that. It's this extractive economy that they're building up. You hear a lot about, the WEF and Agenda 2030. It's about extraction. It's about getting as much, squeezing, like the Baron Harkonnen from Dune, as much as possible out of us until we're nothing but dry husks. That's what the parody of so-called parody of capitalism. I call it that because it's not capitalism, it's statism. All of this is corporate government nexus statism. It's not capitalism.
It's all rent seeking, and the core of the ability to rent seek is the power of the state, the regulatory state, the diktat state. Eric, I know we're up against the clock. Let's show the website once more, EricetersAutosDotCom. And if people want to find you on X, it is at apostate27832. That's apostate27832. And this is a big deal. They've been pushing a lot of this in Massachusetts. They had a bill. We'll have to talk about this a little bit more. And Eric, you're hitting a lot of things that are extremely important, and you've got a lot of information in here for everybody around the country, whatever region they're in. So this particular piece, I hope they start with this. Maybe they'll go into some of the other ones that are there as well while they're having dinner or anything like that, because there's so much to learn here, and then share it with their friends because it's really, really important. Well, thank you. I know you.
My brake lines are fine. So if I have an accident,
I'll remember that. That's right. And you don't have to drive around in a Flintstones vehicle. You don't need to use your feet. So far, you're okay.
So far.
All right, man. Thank you. Awesome to talk to you, Eric. And we will talk to you via text afterwards. EricPetersAutos.com. Live long and prosper. Whatever mirror universe you're in.
Next time I'll have a goatee. I'll be evil.